Yeah, this is great.
When I look at what's happening in a country, whether it's Iran with what's happening there or what's happening currently in Ukraine or in so many other places in the world right now, I think that asking people if they need help and sometimes just not asking but just volunteering help and doing it, we should just be doing as a standard norm. I don't think it should be associated with catastrophes.
The war in Ukraine has begun.
Vladimir Putin authorized a special military operation in Ukraine.
The largest invasion of a neighboring country in Europe since World War II.
When Russian troops invaded her homeland in February, Ukrainian-born actress Mila Kunis and her husband Ashton Kutcher stepped up to help those in danger.
Ashton and I have decided to match up to $3 million worth of donations to Airbnb.org and Flexport.org through GoFundMe.org in an effort to raise $30 million.
In a matter of weeks, their GoFundMe campaign raised over $35 million to provide aid and housing for Ukrainians.
How it all went down is war happened. We waited 24 hours and we were like, wow, this is really happening. And then you're waiting to see what people are going to do because you know the military is mobilizing, however that was going to pan out. But you were seeing the civilian situation of everything happening. And you knew that a massive crisis was about to ensue. And it almost all happened in slow motion. And at that point, I wanted no involvement. I didn't look at this as going, this is my time. Like I was like, wow, I hope somebody does something. And then I realized that nobody was doing something. And then I started getting phone calls, I think because I was from Ukraine, people had some sort of preconceived notion that I was gonna know Ukrainian politics, which I really didn't, or have some sort of understanding of NGOs on the ground, which I really didn't. And they were looking out and reaching out to Ash and I being like, what can we do to help? And that was kind of my realization of like, oh, well, if they don't know who to go to, how is anybody gonna know who to go to? And we were like, well, okay, let's do it. And then within 12 hours, we had GoFundMe.org on board. And then we started having to go, what's the number that can Band-Aid a problem that we can solve yesterday? So for us, it was what's already in motion that we can put money towards, that we know ourselves, not just know ourselves, but can also show the people donating the money how it's all gonna go down. So Flexport.org, which does transpo, and then Airbnb.org, which is housing. And we were like, okay, there's freight sitting everywhere right now, full of supplies. We are not lacking supplies when it comes to disasters in this country. People are so giving when it comes to toothpaste and toothbrushes and blankets and any and all sorts of emergency kits. The thing that we are lacking is how to get it from point A to point B, and that is a problem that my husband and I know how to solve. So we created a solution to a problem, very well knowing that our goal was to Band-Aid the problem for 2 to 3 weeks if we were lucky, until another country comes in with billions of dollars, because the sad truth is 30, 40 million by very too little no time.
Mila was in the unique position of being able to connect directly with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky because the two had actually met years ago.
The story's pretty cute. It's our own meet cute, okay? So about 8 years ago, there was a show that was being shopped around in LA that was a remake of a show translated to The Accidental President out of Russia. I had a deal at ABC at the time, and I was like trying desperately to bring this show to ABC. We got outbid, but in the process of like trying to buy this show from Russia that was for sale, I was talking to this guy named Zelensky, who was this actor on the show, and I was like, cool guy, like this is an awesome show. Sorry we didn't win your bid, bye. Cut to 4 years later, however many years later, I was reading the news and they're like, Ukraine has a new Jewish young actor president. And I was like, Ukraine voted in a Jew? Like I was like, Mazel tov. And then I kept looking at the name and I was like, huh, that name sounds so familiar, the name sounds so familiar. And then I put it into my emails and I was like, oh, I know him. And then I was like, this is so awesome, good for him. I don't really know him, but I felt like I knew him. And then I was going to Ukraine for the Yes Conference and he was president at the time and I wasn't gonna bug him. Like I was like, he's probably really busy. He found out that I was coming into town, so he reached out and he was like, I would love to sit down and meet you in person, and my wife, you know, we can all sit down and have like a nice lunch, whatever. And I was like, hell yeah! And so Ashton and I, and Zelensky and his wife, we all sat down and had a beautiful, you know, that was the beginning of our friendship. I've always looked at people that were outspoken as people who talk a lot and act little. And so I've always had this weird probably self-imposed narrative of like, do good, but don't talk about it. And so for as long as I could remember, it was all about privately being a good human being, whether it's philanthropic with money or time or whatever it may be. I was like, don't talk about it. Like, that's just bad and it looks bad. And that's just kind of how I've been my whole life. This was one of those first times I can say, no, it's second time because we did it with Quarantine Wine, but I call it the first time for as far as like a big giant endeavor of fundraising that I've ever outwardly spoken out about being philanthropic. Because I always had this weird connotation to it that led me to believe if you talk about it, then you're not actually doing anything. And in this case, there was no way of me getting this accomplished without talking about it. And so I think twofold. A, brought awareness to an unfortunate situation, but even more so than that, it very much brought me out of my comfort zone as far as it's uncomfortable to ask people for money. That is the biggest thing with fundraising is you have to be like, can you give me money? And aside from it being uncomfortable to call people asking for money, you're then responsible for people's hard-earned dollar, $10, $5. And the greatest thing is, it's whatever we had, 70,000 donors, I don't even remember, majority of which gave an average of $5 to $10. We had amazing big donors and people that went from $1 million to $2 to $3 to $10,000 to $20 to $35,000. But the number is majority $1 to $10 was donated. And you know that that is that person's hard-earned wage, and you don't want it to be wasted. And so I think that having that pressure that was then public very much took my husband and I out of our comfort zone.
2022 has been an incredibly busy year for Mila. The actress has also ventured into the world of producing, helping oversee multiple shows and the new Netflix movie Luckiest Girl Alive, in which she also stars.
I love working and I love what I do, and I'm okay to say that. Like, I genuinely love it. Like, I think it's wonderfully messed up and messy and it's great. So that being said, I was like, oh, I need to figure out a hobby in this industry. I have no other skills, I have no other talents, but I'm really good at, I think, telling people what to do. So I was like, a producer tells people what to do. And then through a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes and all of the adventure that our little company went on, we realized we really do love doing this. And I can do it. I can drop my kid off at school. I can go home. I can be on all my calls. I can do my notes. I can do my edits. I can do everything I need to do and then go pick up my kid from school. And so to me, that was the reason for it, honestly. It was less to do with like, I need control over my own stuff and more like, I need a hobby while I don't shoot a movie once a year. But then I only realized that I could actually produce my own content. And I felt like if I produced my own content from the get-go, like that was gonna be like a cheap shot. And I was like, I would need to prove that I can create content without me in it. That was a way harder road to take, and I don't recommend it. So don't do that. Don't do that. Don't go in with an ego. Just do it. This is much easier. And so then I was like, oh, let me just produce for myself. So then when I started producing for myself, the first movie that we did was Luckiest Girl.
In addition to her fundraising efforts and her acting and producing work, Mila is also a mother of two.
There's like a natural thing with my 6 and 8-year-old, and I think all the little 6 and 8-year-olds that are, you know, in our little bubble of life, that are naturally growing up with this want to do better onto others. Like, they look at the world more globally. I think it being in the news and it's, you know, the word Ukraine is just talked about so much more, that they themselves have naturally found pride in being half Ukrainian. It wasn't me necessarily making them that. It's that they were like, they're these awesome people and they're fighting a war and I'm half of that, so I'm awesome. And you're like, you are awesome. So it's like just self-identifying at a young age, and that's who they what they self-identify with. And then I know that we are personally raising our kids with a very much of a global mindset, because it makes you be so aware of the world around you, so much bigger, and you get a better sense of like what you can provide in the world. I also think that now we're raised, I mean, I can go on and on and on, but I was raised to memorize, right? Like, my version of education was like memorize, 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 test, 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 memorize, 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 test, test, test. And our children are going to a school, or I think now most schools are teaching the concept of just asking questions and being curious and problem solving, not in a way that there's a right or wrong answer, but just large problem solving all day long. Everything's about a different way to solve a problem. And I think that little generation of those big thinkers are going to be a huge difference.